Welcome Year 10s to this video about box plots. By watching this video, it's going to enable you to continue with this topic. This is actually our final display that we need to look at, and it is a new one. It's unlikely you would have come across these in previous years. I mean, you might have, but I'm going to make an assumption that this is brand new for everybody. So in our last lesson, we looked at something called the 5-number summary. Now, if you think back to what is included in the 5-number summary, you'll recall that it's our minimum value, our first quartile, which we call the lower quartile Q1, then our median, our upper quartile Q3, and then our maximum. There's our 5-number summary. So it's basically breaking these 5 numbers, break up our data into quarters. We've got our lowest number, our 25th percentile, our 50th percentile or a halfway point, our 75th percentile, and then our maximum value. Now what we're going to do today with a box plot is we're going to see how you can basically put these 5 numbers into a graphical display, and it's going to allow the reader of your box plot to really quickly get a nice snapshot of the data. So you could do that obviously by giving them just a list of numbers, but by putting it into something called a box plot, you're actually going to see a scaled number line, and that gives us then an idea not just about these 5 numbers, but also the spread of those numbers as well. So you'll see if you have a look down the page a little bit, there is a box plot shown for you just there. And I'm just going to run through those dot points that are written above, just so that I can explain them as we go. Now, throughout this video, if you've got any questions, you just need to jot them down. So just pause me and jot those questions down, because in our next lesson, I'll be able to run through those with you. So the first dot point talks about the diagram. The box plot diagram is made up of a box with horizontal lines. So if you have a look here, you'll have this rectangular box, and then you'll have these horizontal lines that extend from the left-hand side and the right-hand side of that box. Now, these lines here, these horizontal lines, we call them whiskers. So sometimes these plots are called box and whisker plots. So that means the exact same thing. We tend to just say, I find it easier just to say box plot. The box itself, so this rectangular box, starts at the lower quartile, so Q1, and then when you draw it on your number line, you're going to extend the box until you reach the upper quartile of the data. So remember, we'll find them on our calculator, Q1 and Q3, and you'll have a number line underneath. And so you will basically put a vertical line at Q1 and Q3, and then you're going to make a box with those 2 vertical lines. What you'll then do is you'll see that there's a line that is inside the box, and that line is going to represent where the median is in your data. So once you've got your box on, you'll have a look at your 5-number summary and you'll find the median. You'll line up the median value with the number line. Like I said, there'll be a number line underneath, and then you'll put a vertical line. So every box plot that you come across, bar a few exceptional cases, will have a box with a line visible. Now that line can be anywhere inside the box, because your median can be quite close to Q1, it could be quite close to Q3, or it could be smack bang right in the middle. So I've talked about the vertical line in the box, that's our median. The whiskers now. These whiskers are going to extend, so from your Q1, you're going to extend a whisker all the way to your minimum value. Likewise, you're going to do the same at the top end. You're going to extend from Q3 a line that goes up to the maximum value. Now, the only exception to that is if your minimum or your maximum value happens to be an outlier. Then we do something a little different, and I'll come back to that because there's another diagram we can look at. So the box plot's always drawn with a labelled scale. Now this one doesn't have one just because this is the one that's explaining all the parts. But if you have a look underneath, there's another box plot and you'll see this one's got a scale underneath it. And so that's absolutely essential for any box plot because you need to be able to read off what these values are. You need, well, the person reading the box plot needs to be able to tell, say, what this little dot is, or where the median is on this number line, and where Q1 and Q3 are. So that's very important, and obviously scaling is always important. So the distance from the smallest to the largest point is the range. So if you go from this point on your box plot, and then you find the last little entry, so it's not necessarily this bit, it could be that bit up there, because that actually represents a data value. That will be the range of our data, so from here to here, because this here is our maximum and that's our minimum down there. If I just remove that, I could have done that with this box plot as well. That was my maximum. I would read off what that number is from the scale, and there's my minimum. I do the same thing, and then I can do my maximum minus minimum. Now, another point is about the interquartile range, because you can actually get your interquartile range from your box plot as well. Because you can read off Q3 and you can read off Q1, that means that you'll be able to do your Q3 minus Q1, which is your IQR. Another way of looking at it is if I look at the length of that box, so how wide is it, that will be the IQR as well, because that there is the difference between Q1 and Q3. So really, essentially what's happening is we've got a diagram that splits our data into quarters. Our lowest quarter is going to be on that bottom whisker, and our top quarter of the data is going to be in the top whisker. Our middle 50%, so half of your data, is going to be contained within this range, this interquartile range we call it, but within this range that the box is sitting in, half of your data is in there. And then if you find your median, you can actually break that up into 2 quarters. So we've got a quarter here and we've got a quarter there. So the only reason the sizes of each section in the box are not the same is because our data is actually clustered more together in this section, and it's a bit more spread out in that section. So that's why I said before that the box plot is really good for us to not only see where our quartiles are and our median, etc., but to see the spread of the data as well. Because if you've got something that's a box plot that's really, really stretched out, that means you've got quite a large spread of data. Whereas if it's really clustered together and you've got really little whiskers and this box is quite small, then you've actually got a lot of data that's in a very, very small range or very small interval. Now, I said before that I'd touch on outliers. Outliers are those values we talked about in our last lesson, and that's the ones that are very different. So if you have an outlier, you actually will mark it on with either a dot, like this one is, or you can use a small cross. So alternatively to the dot, you can put something like that, and that is also another indicator that there's an outlier there. So you're probably wondering then, well, if I mark an outlier there, then where does the whisker go to? Because up here I mentioned that generally it will go to your maximum value, but sometimes you can't do that because that maximum value might be an outlier. So this is still the maximum. So if that happens, and if you have to draw a box plot that contains outliers, you just make your whisker go to the next value in the data. So if I have a look here, this outlier is sitting at about 260, 265. So there must be another value in the data so the next one below that must be at 210, 20, about 230. So there must be a value, so it might go 230 and then 265 if I had all of my data in order. So because that one was an outlier, we mark it on as a dot. So that the whisker will not extend to that one. It will extend to this next highest one. And I will show you, of course, in using an example so we can see that in practice. So before we actually get to drawing one, let's just have a go at interpreting one. So here we've got part-time weekly earnings. So you'll see a label is important on your number line. And we can see that the earnings are measured in dollars as well. So any units would be placed in a bracket next to your label. Looking at this box plot, I've got this lowest value here of 20. So that would be my minimum. By the way, sometimes at the end of the whiskers, sometimes they'll just stop like this one does here. But what you can do is put just a solid dot to show the end of the whisker. Just make sure if you do have an outlier that it's very clear that that's not an outlier. Because if it was an outlier, we should see a gap between the dot and the next highest value. So this here would not be an outlier, like I said, because I should see some sort of gap between it and the rest of the data. These dots are just here to show the end of the whisker. So I want the 5-number summary. I've got my minimum. The next value will be my Q1, which is always where the box starts. So that's 40. The next number is my median, so that's on this line. I'll just use a capital M. That's 50. Up to Q3, that's where the box ends, so 80. And finally, the maximum, where the whisker ends, so that's at 90. So I'll just put my units in brackets to the side because, of course, this is actually $20, $40, $50, etc. So I'll just put it at the end just to make it easier. So there's my 5-number summary, which I've established from this box plot. So what I know then is that half the data that was taken, and I don't know how much data, but half of it was below 50, half of it was above 50, a quarter of the data was below 40, and 3/4 was above 40. And if I go to Q3, 1/4 of the data was above 80, and 3/4 must have been below 80. Okay, so we want to get to some examples. Now, the good thing is your calculator will assist you in creating a box plot. So I do highly recommend that you use your calculator to help you, and I am going to show you, of course, how to do that. So with this first one, when I want to construct a box plot, I need my 5-number summary. So if I was doing this by hand, I'd order all of the data, I'd find my minimum, my Q1, my median, my Q3, and my maximum. But of course, that's going to take quite a long time. So there's no point in me doing that when I've got technology to assist me and to speed things up or make things far more efficient. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the calculator. Here it is now. And the first thing we're going to do, as we always do, if we want any stats or if we want a display, we're going to have to put the data into the calculator. So I want you to press on a list and spreadsheet, and I want you to open up one of these. The first thing we're always going to do is label our data. Now, some people forgot this in the last lesson, and we saw that it caused problems. So make sure you give it a label. This was points scored by a basketball team, so I'm just going to put points. Now, you can just put P because that's going to be a lot faster for you rather than using this silly keyboard. But I've got a proper keyboard in front of me, so I can put a full label there. You're then going to enter all of your data, and you're going to do that down the column. Being careful to obviously enter all of the data and try not to repeat anything by accident, which I sometimes do. Okay, so it did say in the question it was over 11 games, and if you have a look here, it says I've got 11 pieces of data. So that's a good sign. Hopefully I've entered them all correctly, because now what we're going to do is create the box plot. Now I can get the 5-number summary first if I want and use that to create the box plot. So that would be by going menu 411, and it's one list, and then entering, of course, points. So we saw that the other day, and we should have been practicing that a fair bit by now. If I scroll down a bit, I can see my 5-number summary: minimum, Q1, median, Q3, maximum. So if I wanted to, that would be one strategy, and then I could rule a line, create a number line that that goes from 16 up to 31 at least, and then I can draw my box plot on. But I can actually get the whole box plot on my calculator. So that's what I'm going to show you now. Say I just entered my data in. What you're going to do now is you're going to open a new tab. So that's Control and then I. And then I want you to press on number 5, so Add Data and Statistics. Now, of course, if you need to see that again, just rewind and watch again. Now, when you go to Data and Statistics, you'll notice it's opened a new tab for me. It's just sort of put these dots randomly on the screen, and all it's done is basically told me that there's data available for me to create a display. Now, what we need to do is we need to put this data onto a number line. So if you have a look down here, this is a horizontal axis down here, and it says click to add or click to enter variable. So you're going to use your little scroll pad, which is this big one, to scroll down to this section, and you're going to press on it. And what you're going to notice is any label that you have used will come up. And so now what I can do is I can select the data. I can select points, which I entered before. Now what you're going to see just happen is a dot plot has been created. And it's quite cool because I can hover over these dots and I can see their values. Well, I can read them off the scale anyway, but I can also do this and I can see which value each of the data pieces has. Of course, I don't want a dot plot, I want a box plot. So what you're going to do after this is press on Menu, and then you'll click on Plot Type, which is the first one, and then number 2, Box Plot. So you don't need to worry about writing down all of these instructions, because you'll notice that they are actually in a couple of pages. You'll see that there is a summary sheet of all those steps that I just went through to get a box plot on your calculator. So just one more time, from the dot plot, we go Menu, Plot Type, and then Box Plot. And then it's like magic, we now have a box plot on our calculator screen. Now, if you have a look down here, we've also got a scaled number line. So what I can do on my page is I can now replicate that. So I'll draw this number line and I'll label it as points, and then I'm going to draw the box plot. So it's given me already the minimum, it's given me Q1, the median, the Q3, and the maximum. What I can also see is there are no outliers in this data because there's nothing that's got like a little dot. So outliers will be shown separately as that little solid circle. So we mustn't have any in this particular box plot, in this particular data. The next one I show you will have outliers, and so we'll have a go at determining those before we draw it. Okay, so back to this screen. So there is a little space, there is a little space there. That's if you want to jot down your 5-number summary, but you're absolutely free to use your calculator here, so it's not necessary to find it all by hand. So 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, and I might need to extend that out a little bit since I haven't given myself enough room, because I needed to get to at least 31. So if I take this up to 32, that will work. Oh, it's not perfectly straight. Okay, so we'll add our numbers on now. So you notice it worked well in this case to go up by 2s. Sometimes you have to use a different scale. So going up, say, in 5s or in 10s or sometimes in hundreds, depending on what your data looks like. Okay, so I knew that my minimum was 16. So my box plot is going to start there. I'm going to have a whisker there. And it goes up to 31, so the end whisker is going to be there. I like to draw the box first. I don't know why, I just find that a lot easier. So if we have a look at our box, it starts at 21 and it ends at 27. So just go back to this. Starts at 21, so you want a vertical line at 21. and it ends at 27. So I'll do the same there. Now, mine's not going to be as perfect as yours is because I'm trying to do that, obviously do it on the screen here. But then what you're going to do is you're going to close the box off. You can use a ruler and make it a lot easier. I might just copy that actually and then move it there. So we've got our box. Okay. The next thing we want to do is our median. So median, hover over it. It tells me it's 25. Okay, so 25 is, oops, I didn't want to do that. Might just take that and copy it. 25, so perfectly halfway between 24 and 26 if you can. And then finally my whiskers. So, oops. I might just have to draw it up here and then move it. So from the box to 16. Try and make it sort of central. And then from the box to 31. There we go. The final thing that you will do is put your label on. So this was points scored. There we go. So there's our first box plot that we've created. Again, make sure you're using your calculator because that's what it's there for. You will be making it harder for yourself if you refuse to get used to using the calculator functions. The instructions are just on the very next page. So you'll see you're selecting the list and spreadsheet, you're entering the data, you're pressing Control I, you're entering the data down here where it says click to add variable, and then it's got which buttons you need to press to get your box plot. You'll see with the one in this example what an outlier looks like because it's got that solid, it's got a blue filled in dot. So we're going to do one with an outlier now because it'll give us more practice on determining whether there are any outliers. And that's why this question here has been broken up a little bit. You actually do need to find the 5-number summary, the IQR. And the reason you need the IQR is so that you can do this bit, determine if there are outliers using those calculations, the lower fence and the upper fence. And then once you've done that, you can basically confirm it using your calculator and then you can draw the box plot. So we'll finish off this video with this one. So first step, head to your calculator and we are going to put some new data in. So I'm just going to delete this. You can just make a new page if you want to. Either way, it doesn't matter if you even just write over the top of your other data, just so long as you've got a new list. Now this is eggs laid, so I'll call it eggs, and then I'm going to enter my data in. All right, it says over a 13-day period, and I've got 13 data values. So again, hopefully I haven't made any errors in my data entry. Calculate the 5-number summary. So the easiest thing would be to, instead of ordering it and doing it by hand, I'm going to go menu 4 and then 1, 1. Oops, that didn't work for me. Try again. Menu 4, 1, 1. That's better. All right, number of lists. I've only got one list. Basically, every time you do this, you'll have one list. And then it's asking what the data is called. So remember, you can press that right arrow and then select eggs and press enter. Okay, I'll scroll down until I see my 5 numbers. So I've got 2, 3.5, 5, 6.5, and 12. So we'll go back and we'll put that in. So 2, 3.5, 5, and I've forgotten the other 2 already, 6.5 and 12. Okay. Find the IQR. Now that's Q3 minus Q1. So our Q3 is this number here, 6.5 minus 3.5. So that's going to give us an IQR of 3. The next thing you need to do is determine if there are outliers. So you should always be use workings for this sort of thing. So if it's asking you to show there's outliers or find out if there are outliers, you do have to show workings. So our lower fence is our Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. So Q1 is 3.5. So we'll go minus 1.5 times 3. And our upper fence is Q3 plus 1.5 by the IQR. So that's going to give us 6.5 plus 1.5 times 3. So you most likely will go to your calculator at this point. Now, if you haven't got a calculator screen open, remember just Control I brings up our menu and we can add a calculator now. So 3.5 minus 1.5 multiplied by 3. And we get -1. We'll interpret that in a second. Our other one was 6.5, and it's plus, because we're looking at the top end of the data now, times by 3. And we get 11. Okay, now let's interpret. For our fences, think about your lower fence. There will be an outlier in your data if in your data set, I'll need to scroll up so we can see it, if there's a value less than -1 in your data, then we have a lower end outlier. Now, of course, you can't have a negative number of eggs laid, so we don't have an outlier at the bottom end. If we look at our top end though, our upper fence is 11. Now, you can see from the maximum value that we actually do have a value that is greater than 11. That's what we need to think about. We're looking for anything lower than the lower fence or higher than the upper fence. And we do have something higher than the upper fence. We have this one, the 12. And always check that there aren't any more, because sometimes you can have multiple outliers. In this case, just the one value is above the upper fence. So what we say is 12 is greater than the upper fence, or you can write it even in words. 12 is greater than the upper fence of 11. Therefore, and I like to use these little dots, therefore 12 is an outlier. Now, just to be sure, what we can do, which is neat, if you go back here, you know we've got our data stored as eggs. So if I do Control I and adds data and statistics, I can have a look at the box plot, and that will tell me as well whether there's an outlier. So if I go down to click to add variable, and I select eggs, remember that's not a box plot, that's a dot plot, and then we change it. So menu, plot type, box plot. All right, there is our box plot, and as you can see, we've just confirmed that we do have an outlier at 12. So it's a really good way to check your answers actually. So say in an assessment you were asked to test for outliers, well, you could even create a box plot on your calculator just to be double or triple sure that your calculations are accurate. So now all we have to do is draw this box plot on the page. So we want to, you could use this same scale, 1 to 12. We've got 2 as our minimum. We've got 3.5, 5, 6.5. Now all these values we had written down already. And then we've, if you have a look here, it actually also shows us where the whisker should go to. So our whisker can't go to the 12 because 12 is an outlier. And so we don't want to extend that whisker out there because then we can't actually see that 12 is unusual. We can't see that that value actually is an outlier. And so the very next value in our data, we didn't have anything that was 11, we didn't have anything that was 10, but we did have a value at 9. And so that's where your whisker is going to extend to. Okay, so nice and quickly to finish this off, we're just going to go 1 to 12. Well, just fit. That was lucky. I haven't perfectly spaced these, so just make sure that you use your ruler to make it as, I guess, scaled as possible. I've had to do it rough or freehand, I should say, and so it's not perfect. Okay, so my 5 numbers summary, we had it above. So I'm going to put my box in first at 3.5 up to 6.5. So 3.5. I'll just copy that, and 6.5. Okay, close that off. There we go. Our median we'll do next. Median was 5. There we go. And I'll do the lower whisker because that one didn't have the outlier. The lower whisker is going to go down to 2. So try and make it central. There we go. Now our top whisker, because we've got, I might put the outlier in now, the outlier is at 12. So a little dot. Our whisker is going to go to 9 because remember that was the next value below that outlier. That was in the data. It has to be in the data. So if you have a look up here, there's my 9. Okay, so there it is finally. This is number of eggs. And there's our final, our finished product, our last box plot. So we are going to need lots of practice with this, the drawing of them, but particularly getting them on our calculator because we want to get into a position where we can do that really quickly. So I'll stop here so that you can start your next exercise, which is on your work plan.